Tony. You see him on the right winning last round over Jeff Hoagland. He needs to do it one more time. But he'll have to get through. You know, Living End, I really like this deck as far as where it fits in Modern. We see it every second or third tournament. Was the runner-up deck, what was it, nearly 4 years ago in GP Omaha?
Yeah, it's a very powerful deck. Cascade and zero mana suspend spells has been just kind of a very powerful interaction in Legacy and Modern for some time. Living End has never really been dominant in the format, but it's always been capable of putting up results, and this kind of field it seems quite solid in. Right now, there's not a ton of very fast combo decks that would really prey on a deck like Living End, so I do like the position. So I think it was a really good choice for Pierce for this weekend. It's working out so far, and he's just at the cusp of a top 8.
Right now, David Pierce, a judge question away from table before the match starts. We'll get it started as soon as that is resolved. And this can actually happen a lot of times if there's a certain rules interaction that you need to know about a matchup. You don't want your opponent to know what you're asking.
Yeah, we're late enough in the tournament where David might know that Tony is on Kiki Cord before the games even start.
Yeah, Tony was the feature match last round. So we'll start with David Pierce. Living End, he's won the die roll and elects to go first. Starts with Blackcleave Cliffs and a pass. For Tony, it will be a copy of Breeding Pool.
I found the solution to the combo in the graveyard problem. 3 main deck Fairy Macabre in David Pierce's deck list.
Wow.
It's a very high number of Fairy Macabre.
He will cycle away Architects of Will in the end step. Tony made Birds of Paradise turn 1. Draw. And Razor Verge Thicket. Or Copperline Gorge for David Pierce.
Yep, and these are how the first couple of turns usually look for Living End. Cycle things at your opponent's end step, start building up the graveyard.
Yeah, this creature base for Living End is a little non-traditional. So yes, he has the Monstrous Carabids, the Street Wraiths, and Architects of Will to cycle, but he has main deck cards like Pale Recluse, 3 Fairy Macabres, the full set of Fulminator Mages in the deck.
Big fan of the 4 Fulminator Mages. He also has 3 Beast Withins. That's definitely going to make it very hard for a Tron deck to take any games against this deck.
Yeah, three Beast Withins and 4 Fulminators in the main. He has a plan here. Tony makes a second Birds of Paradise and a Raging Ravine. David will cycle Pale Recluse. So with 2 Birds of Paradise, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on David to fire off an early Living End.
I'd be pretty inclined to do that. Pale Recluse, it's a 4/6 or 4/5 rather with reach, and we have another creature hanging out in the graveyard with the Architects of Will. So you'd be able to attack for 7, and setting back those 2 Birds of Paradise is very important in this matchup.
Forest cycles the Pale Recluse, so gets a forest into his hand.
Not to mention, if the Birds of Paradise are off the board and Pierce has, say, like a Fulminator Mage or a Beast Within in hand, he can really go to work on Lee's mana.
And so no Living End just yet. He will cast on turn 3 Fulminator Mage, taking care of that Raging Ravine.
So now a Living End on the following turn would probably just win the game on the spot.
Well, you get a 3/3, a 4/5, and get to blow up another land of Tony's.
Yeah, that Fulminator Mage is brutal.
1 copy of Living End already in Pierce's hand. He may have to be careful. If he draws a second one, remember there's only 3 in the deck. And here's a big punisher. Tony Lee with his main deck copy of Scavenging Ooze. This is a 1/of. Plays it and has 2 green mana up.
That's bad news.
Exiles away. Wow. Exiles away immediately that Fulminator Mage. That was huge.
Yeah, and now he won't. Pierce now does not have the ability to set up for a Living End. He has to just go for a Cascade spell if he has it. Otherwise, he's just losing to this Scavenging Ooze.
Exiles away the Pale Recluse. Ooze grows to a 4/4. This is a 1/of in Tony's deck, but it couldn't have come soon enough. 4th land from David Pierce. Now, in the main deck, his ways to kill off a Scavenging Ooze, he has 3 copies of Beast Within. He's going to Demonic Dread the Scavenging Ooze. It cascades into Living End. In response to Living End, he cycles Deadshot Minotaur. And now he'll cycle Street Wraith. So maybe he's just going to win through Scavenging Ooze.
Wow.
Cycles another, draws Street Wraith off Street Wraith, cycles that too.
That's absurd. Oh, well, the Fairy Macabre, he can, oh wow, he can just discard them and not have to exile any of his creatures from his graveyard.
So then discards 2 Fairy Macabres. So he had no graveyard and then just put, what was it, 5 creatures in it? Yeah, 1 Minotaurs, 2 Street Wraiths, 2 Fairy Macabres. It's up to 2 cards, so he can just discard them for nothing. So Tony's creatures all hit the graveyard. David gets 5 creatures into play.
Do you remember that 5 seconds when the Scavenging Ooze looked really good?
Yeah. Yeah. This was a... Goodness. Okay. David Pierce has an entire army in play. We go back over to Tony. He untaps with 2 lands.
And this is 14 power on Pierce's side of the table. It's a 2-turn clock through a couple of blockers.
And keep in mind that Architect's Will meant that David got to rearrange the top 3 cards of Tony's deck. So Tony's not going to draw out of it this turn.
No. Unless he just had 3 aces on the top of his deck, but he doesn't really have a lot that he can do in a position like this one way or the other.
If there are no true sweepers in the main deck of Kiki Cord.
There's not enough mana to combo off in time.
Wow. So Tony's going to sacrifice Windswept Teeth. That'll reset his deck. So those other 2 cards that were left, they're not going to come. He's trying to figure out how can he get through these. He would need to find some sort of, I guess, blocker, get some Restoration Angels down. I'd say if he had Tarmogoyfs in his deck, they'd be really good right now, but unlike other sorts of Cord decks, Kiki Cord's creatures actually are relatively small in size.
Yeah, the creatures that are castable at this point in the mana curve are just going to be chump blockers.
2 mana, Wall of Omens from Tony.
Well, this one's not a chump blocker per se, but it's also not a profitable blocker.
Yeah, he'll pass. Go back over to David Pierce. Copperline Gorge is the play. Just going to swing all out. Wall of Omens blocks 3 damage, but 11 comes across. Tony's at 8. Just go back over the Kiki Cord player. He needs to deploy enough creatures to stay alive. Cannot afford to take another 11. So he'll need 2 blockers to survive.
Starting off losing some life on a dual land.
On a dual land goes down to 6. And he'll pass. Looks like he's leaving Deceiver Exarch in his hand.
Okay, so that could tap an attacker, block an additional creature, though still not making any blocks that remove creatures from Pierce's battlefield.
So we go back on David Pierce's turn then. Go to attacks. Actually, he's going to Demonic Dread the Wall of Omens. I like this a lot. Remember, Demonic Dread actually has text. Target creature can't block this turn.
You don't see it a lot where you just cast Demonic Dread, no cascades, but it does come up.
What's important is that David does not have to cast the card he cascades into. He can decline to cast it.
Exactly. 3 mana, target creature can't block. Not the hallmark of modern playability, but I imagine it'll be doing the trick here.
I believe the Living End he cascaded into and declined to cast should be exiled here. Now, that's unlikely to matter, depending on how much longer this game goes. Tony's going to put a Deceiver Exarch into play, tap a Street Wraith, block, path to exile away the Deadshot Minotaur.
Okay, so looks like Lee is hanging out at 1 life total after all is said and done here.
Actually, okay, so we're correct. Correction. The Living End actually does go back on the bottom, so now it's shuffled in. So that means he has 1 Living End in hand. 1 Living End has been cast. Yeah. So the 1 Living End is still left in his deck. Tony, so pathed, blocked, took some damage, but now concedes on the next turn.
Now, if Tony could cast a Kiki Jiki that turn, that would have won the game, which is actually kind of amazing how close things sort of were. There's only the 1 Kiki Jiki to find in the deck.
So game 1 goes to David Pierce and Living End. It's up a game on Kiki Cord. We're going to go ahead and start by looking at the sideboards. On Tony Lee's side, Kiki Cord, we saw the 1 Scavenging Ooze he has in the main deck. A lot of different cards here on the board. He has an Izzet Staticaster, a Burrenton Forest Tender, a 2nd Scavenging Ooze, Fulminator Mage, Engineered Explosives, Lightning Helix, Pian Kiran Nalaar, Eidolon of Rhetoric, Stony Silence, Reclamation Sage, and Unified Will.
So this sideboard actually has more going for it than I was expecting. The Scavenging Ooze, of course, to supplement the one copy in the main deck. Eidolon or Rhetoric will stop the Cascade mechanic. So Pierce would not be able to Cascade into Living End with Eidolon in play, so I like the Eidolon quite a lot. And then the 2 Unifying Wills as counterspells, those are going to be very solid here.
Yeah, so he has a lot of good option there. Now on David's side, the Living End sideboard is a lot of bullets here. So we have 4 Brindlebores, 3 Shriekmaws, 3 Ingot Chewers, 3 Ricochet Trap, and 2 copies of Anger of the Gods.
Standouts here, 3 Shriekmaws, 2 Anger of the Gods. You can use those to stop Tony from getting into a profitable Court of Calling range. So those should be coming in here. You don't need anything like Beast Within in the deck, so those are probably coming out for the Angers. And then you make some room with the Shriekmaw with some of the Cyclers. Probably want to leave Fairy Macabre in the deck, at least in some capacity, in case some problematic creatures end up in the graveyard. But you have some space to cut some of the cycling creatures anyway.
David Pierce and Tony Lee getting ready for Game 2. This match is for a spot in top 8, so with a win here, David Pierce will put he and his Living End deck will make it into the top 8. These players get ready for that. We're going to tell you a second about Star City Games Regionals. These are coming up at the beginning of August. So, as you know, this happens twice a year. We have our regionals. These are the Season 2 Regional Championships. So, a lot going on that weekend. First of all, we have an exclusive playmat and token for the first 200 players to register at each location. You see the Hot Pursuit playmat. That's the dragon, and he's in hot pursuit of the goblin. Ugh, not again. On this goblin token. So you can get both playmat and token by being one of the first 200 people to register for the event. This is going to be August 6th. The format is going to be standard. And we now have the prize payout and locations are available. This is part of the SCG Tour. So what that means is there are SCG points for Season 2 awarded for people placing well in this event, much like SCG Open. And if you top 8 this, in the same way when you top 8 an Open, not only do you get money, do you get SCG points, you get a qualification for the Invitational. So, for example, the Season 2 Invitational, which is in New Jersey, happening just 2 weeks after the Regional Championships. You can find out the locations near you. We have all over the U.S. and Canada on this map here. So these are the cities they're in. If you want to know more, maybe the exact spot in the city and how to register, find out all that at starcitygames.com/regionals.
I really like the playmat for this one. There's a lot that's very aesthetically pleasing about that playmat.
So Game 2, Tony is on the play. Not thrilled about his hand here. Remember on the draw last game, he had a turn 1 Birds of Paradise, turn 2 Birds of Paradise, but quickly got Fulminator maged into a very explosive Living End.
Yeah, a lot of surprise value on some free discards for that Living End.
Yeah, if you missed it, Tony had exiled away all of David's graveyard except for 1 3/3.
Yep.
Then on one turn, David played a 1-mana Cycler,
cycled Street Wraith into Street
Wraith, and pitched 2 Fairy Macabres.
It's what you would call a good turn.
Turn 1 is Noble Hierarch from Tony. For David, it's just a copy of Stomping Ground. Go back to the Kiki Chord player. He'll play Voice of Resurgence. Now, Voice of Resurgence makes a elemental token when it dies. However, that's not how Living End works.
Right, it's some goofy templating. The creatures are exiled and then put in the graveyard from exile.
David Pierce is going to accelerate out a Fulminator Mage using Simian Spirit Guide, and he'll destroy that copy of Raging Ravine.
I like the aggression on that. You know, you don't really need the Simian Spirit Guide for a Living End here. Just use it for the mana. Presumably, a 3rd land drop is available. Just gets aggressive with the Fulminator Mage.
Well, both Demonic Dread and Violent Outburst are in David's hand, so when he's ready, he'll have a lot of copies of Living End.
Oh, yeah.
But you're right, he doesn't have the Cyclers you'd normally expect, right? He played a tapped Stomping Ground on his first turn.
Yep.
Voice Resurgence will attack for 3.
Looks like he has a Shriekmaw and I think a Fairy Macabre hanging out in hand. On the following turn, the Shriekmaw to give Lee more mana woes by taking care of the Noble Hierarch.
I like that.
Building up a bigger Living End. This position looks pretty solid for Pierce. A lot of pressure on Lee to have those copies of Unified Will.
Right, there's this pressure point here where Tony doesn't want to play another creature because of Living End, but if he doesn't play any creatures, then David can Shriekmaw away his board.
Yep.
You see, he's going to evoke Shriekmaw. You're absolutely right, going for the mana. Noble Hierarch is the target. Yeah, if Tony only plays this 2/2 and doesn't play anything else, David won't play the Living End. that Expedition there, a copy of Horizon Canopy. So this represents Tony's only blue source.
Looks like he might be, if he has something like Path to Exile, the Path is Hierarch in response. That would be an interesting play. Gotta be able to cast spells somehow.
Looks like he has a Deceiver Exarch in his hand, and he's debating if he wants to go for it right now. As he's about to lose his only blue mana source, this is a big decision.
Yeah.
At the very least, he'll float the blue mana. Looks like he'll actually, that's what you said, Path to Exile. Going to actually path away David's Shriekmaw.
Okay, that's some fancy play. Keep the Shriekmaw out of the graveyard.
Yeah, now the graveyard's just Fulminator Mage. So Shriekmaw will hit Exile. Pierce will get a Mountain. Now Noble Hierarch goes to the graveyard. So he's accelerated Living End by a land. There's not too much danger in that other than unless David starts to hardcast these creatures.
On this board, Jungle Weaver looks pretty good.
Voice of Resurgence will attack David down to 15. And Tony will just pass. Did hit a land there. It was a copy of Windswept Heath, so he will have that blue mana if he needs. On end step, David cycles Monstrous Carabid, draws one of his copies of Living End, then draws for turn, plays land 5. So he has a Living End, a Violent Outburst, a Demonic Dread, and a Fairy Macabre.
Yeah, this is not a great window to cast Violent Outburst. He has under very little pressure. His graveyard's not particularly great at this point in time. The hope is that Tony will play further into the Living End.
I like what's going on here. Tony has not sacrificed his Windswept Heath. Even though he's lacking blue, he's not getting a dual land with it, because if he did, David could Living End back that Fulminator Mage.
Yep. Both players exhibiting a good amount of patience in this game. Though the time for patience may be over.
David plays a 6th land. He discards Fairy Macabre to exile away some cards in Tony's graveyard. Now he's deciding if he wants to go for a Demonic Dread. It looks like he does. So that will cascade into one of his copies of Living End. A medium Living End here. Tony is going to lose the Voice of Resurgence. Gets exiled, then placed into the graveyard. Said before, no elemental token on this one. So it exiles the graveyard and then sacks the creatures. So he does get the elemental token then, right?
Yeah.
All right, it doesn't trigger it doesn't trigger the other way. So
okay.
For example, Grafdigger's Cage.
Yeah, I mixed up what was exiled.
Yeah, it's the creatures go from play to graveyard the normal way, but the ones that go from graveyard to play, they go from graveyard to exile to play.
Okay.
So there's that extra step means you wouldn't trigger some things. So Tony gets a 1/1 elemental. Now he's going to path to exile away the Monstrous Carabid.
In response to his Horizon Canopy getting Fulminator Maged.
Sure. So David gets the land from the path to exile. Then Tony will draw the card off the Horizon Canopy. So actually he's not drawing a card off the Canopy. He used that for the path to exile. So no card draw off the Horizon Canopy.
Yeah, no other white mana available. He has to crack the Windswept Heath, and
He just doesn't want to do that.
this deck has a lot of different colors in it.
So there's if he wanted to draw the card and path to exile at the same time, he would have had to fetch for the basic planes, which means he wouldn't have blue mana, deciding that the blue mana is important enough that he just went ahead and did not draw off the Horizon Canopy.
Yeah, the concern is definitely on being able to cast spells for the rest of the game.
Tony draws, now he goes for the fetch land. Has green mana in play. We'll see if it's Hallowed Fountain would fix his mana, but leave him vulnerable to Fulminator Mage.
Giving it a big think here.
Does not play His basics in the deck, he has 2 forests, 1 mountain, 1 plains. He gets Sacred Foundry and takes 2.
Okay, so he ended up fetching a white source, so this means he just missed drawing a card off of the Horizon Canopy.
Yeah, he'll play Kasali Pride Mage. That will turn the Elemental into a 2/2. It'll attack and Exalt into a 3/3. David, no blocks, will take the damage. And then crack Bloodstained Mire. So he'll be at 9. 6 lands in play. We are definitely in the territory where David can just start hard casting his monsters.
Yep. We're in Pale Weaver territory. Pale Recluse.
Pale Recluse. Well, I liked that. It was like Jungle Weaver or Pale Recluse, right? So it's
yeah.
the Pale Weaver.
Yeah, we'll pretend like I said something smart. I like it.
Cast Fulminator Mage from Pierce. He'll attack with Fairy Macabre. Tony goes down to 14. And you see David just passed the turn. Didn't go right for Tony's land.
Yeah, his life total is pretty low. I imagine we'll see a block sack on this turn.
That part sounds good. Here's Birds of Paradise. Now the Elemental will attack Exalt up to a 4/4. David blocks and before damage destroys the Sacred Foundry. Tony's back down to just a forest.
And now I have a feeling we'll be seeing a living end on this turn.
Right, so keep in mind, 1 living end is in David's graveyard. The second one is in his hand. So if he casts a living end off Cascade, that's the last one he can cascade into this game. He's going to Violent Outburst. So swings Fairy Macabre, puts Tony to 12, and now he cashes in the second living end. So here it is.
Standard classic players.
Tony
Time in your round.
will lose the Elemental token, lose the Kasali Pride Mage, lose the Birds of Paradise.
Standard classic players.
Going down to just basic forest.
Yep. I believe he can get back that in his graveyard if there is that Voice of Resurgence. Before it resolves, though, David goes ahead and cycles 2 more creatures, so that'll make it a very unequal trade. Tony gets Voice of Resurgence in play for Pierce, Fulminator Mage, Deadshot Minotaur, Monstrous Carabid, and another Fulminator Mage. Just 1 land in play for Tony as he untaps and draws.
Total power for Pierce, 1 shy of Lee's life total.
Has to attack, swings the team.
Of course, Violent Outburst changes that mana.
Yeah, Violent Outburst does give all your creatures +1/+0 until end of turn. Very efficient for 3 mana.
The instant speed Orcish Oriflame.
All right, so it looks like Fulminator Mage set to trade with Voice of Resurgence, and David will cast Violent Outburst. So Carabid's turns into a 5/4, Deadshot Minotaur into a 4/4, Fulminator Mage into a 3/2. That looks like 12 damage coming through. And this shouldn't cascade into anything. The last living end's in his hand, so this should go whiff right through the deck.
If Pierce cascaded into like Brainstorm, he would get a game loss for that because it's not a modern legal card. But otherwise, I imagine this will be the game.
So that is 12 damage exactly. So David Pierce 2-0 with living end defeats Tony Lee and moving to 12-2. That should lock him up for a spot in the top 8.